January 11th, 1944. Dawn broke pale and brittle over England as ground crews at RAF Boxstead hauled oxygen carts, checked .50 cal belts, and listened to the distant rumble of B-17 engines warming across the frozen airfield. Another day, another deep penetration mission into Germany, Oschersleben, one of the most heavily defended industrial targets in the Reich. Every pilot in the 356th Fighter Squadron knew the risks. Every bomber crew knew the losses. Major James H. Howard climbed the ladder into his P-51 Mustang, call sign Ding Hao, moving with the calm precision of a man who understood both the machine beneath him and the responsibility above him. At 30 years old, he was older than most fighter pilots. A former flying tiger who had survived combat in China, Howard brought something rare, a disciplined, almost stubborn clarity about what his mission demanded, but nothing in his experience. Neither the chaotic skies over Burma nor the tactical briefings from 8th Air Force prepared him for what would happen over Oschersleben. The mission was supposed to be routine escort, meet the bomber stream, shepherd them through the most dangerous section of the run, and hand them off to the next escort group. Doctrine was simple. A lone fighter never stays with the bombers. Outnumbered escorts disengage, regroup, and return. Protect the aircraft, protect the pilot, and live to fight another day. No individual Mustang could change the outcome of a full Luftwaffe interception. At 24,000 feet, the 356th made contact. Below them, the bomber formations stretched across the winter sky. 3 massive groups of B-17s, engines droning in disciplined formation as they approached the German coastline. Everything looked routine. Then radar reports came in. More than 30 enemy fighters were climbing to intercept. FW-190s and BF-109s, experienced, aggressive, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By the time Howard and his men reached the B-17s, the sky erupted. Contrails twisted in violent spirals. Tracer streams carved orange streaks through the cold air. And in the opening seconds, the 356th was scattered, pulled apart by the initial dive, fuel constraints, and radio confusion. Howard steadied his Mustang and looked around. He was alone, and the bombers below were about to be overrun. For a moment, Major James Howard simply watched. Below him, the first wave of German fighters tore into the outer edges of the B-17 formations. Single-engine fighters streaked in from 12 o'clock high, a classic head-on approach that bomber gunners dreaded. The Luftwaffe had learned to exploit the weakness in the flying fortress forward firepower, and they came in fast, too fast for the bombers to absorb without escort interference. Howard keyed his radio. Nothing but fragmented chatter. Calls for help, warnings, gunner reports, pilots trying to reassemble scattered elements of his squadron. No one was close enough to join him. No one was diving with him. He pushed the throttle forward. The Mustang shuddered as it accelerated, nose dropping into a steep descent toward the oncoming German fighters. The P-51 was built for this. Speed, reach, precision, but using it alone against an entire interception wave was something no instructor, no manual, no senior officer had ever endorsed. Howard didn't care. The situation was brutally simple. If he didn't go down there, those bombers would die. 300 men, dozens of aircraft, a mission that needed to succeed. He aimed for the lead FW-190, slicing toward a B-17 in the leftmost group. The German pilot was lining up his cannon burst when Howard opened fire. Long, disciplined bursts, not panicked, not wasteful, just deliberate streams of .50 caliber rounds. The FW-190 caught fire, broke apart, and fell out of formation, trailing smoke. The bomber gunners saw it. A sudden spark of hope pulsed through the formation. But the Luftwaffe adjusted instantly. 2 more fighters dove on Howard, tried to force him off the bombers. He pulled up sharply, rolled, and cut across their attack line. Another burst, another enemy hit. The second German pulled away, damaged but still flying. Howard's radio crackled faintly. Single Mustang. Who is that? He's all over them. The bomber crews didn't know his name. They only knew that one fighter, just one, was throwing himself directly into the path of every attack run. And Howard could already see the next wave forming. More fighters climbing, more coming in from the sun. He counted at least a dozen. He wiped frost from the inside of his canopy with his glove. He was outnumbered at least 30-1, and the fight had just begun. Howard leveled off beneath the bomber groups, scanning for the next threat. The contrails above were a tangled web. White scars slashed across a pale winter sky. The Luftwaffe was coordinating now. He could see it in their movements. Instead of scattered attacks, they were massing into disciplined elements of 4 and 6, climbing for synchronized passes that would tear the B-17s apart. A single escort fighter was supposed to disengage at this point. Doctrine was absolute. One Mustang cannot stop a formation attack. The enemy simply splits, overwhelms, and bypasses the lone defender. Howard ignored the doctrine. He banked left, engine roaring, placing himself between the lead German element and the highest bomber squadron. The B-17s flew rigidly. No evasive maneuvers, no brakes, just disciplined straight-line flight meant to hold formation integrity. That predictability made them easy targets. The Germans counted on it. Howard intended to break their rhythm. He punched through the contrails, the Mustang's wings cutting thin arcs of vapor as he dove straight at the approaching Focke-Wulfs. The German leader must have thought he was bluffing. No escort pilot charged head-on into a coordinated fighter attack alone. But Howard didn't flinch. He fired at maximum range. Not to destroy, to disrupt. The lead German hesitated, broke formation to avoid a collision, and his wingmen scattered. The entire attack run lost its timing. The B-17 gunners poured tracers into the staggered German fighters, forcing them wider and higher. A run that should have split open the bomber formation instead dissolved into a chaotic, ineffective pass. Howard looped upward again, breathing hard, eyes burning from the cold oxygen flow. The German fighters regrouped quickly, too quickly. They were veterans. Many had survived years of combat. They would not underestimate him again. A radio call broke through the static. "Whoever that Mustang is, keep doing it." Another voice. "He just saved our tail section." Howard saw a trio of Messerschmitt Bf 109s sliding in behind a crippled B-17 on the right flank. No one else was close enough to intervene. He jammed the throttle forward and surged after them. The Mustang's engine, Packard-built, Merlin-powered, screamed as he caught the 109s. He banked sharply, drew a clean firing line, and held it. One Messerschmitt exploded into debris. The second rolled violently to evade. The third pressed on, determined to finish the damaged bomber. Howard closed the distance. He fired until the 109 spun away, trailing smoke. The B-17's dorsal turret gunner shouted into the radio net. "He's fighting like there's a whole squadron behind him." But there wasn't. There was only Major James Howard, alone, and determined to stay that way as long as those bombers needed him. Howard climbed again, cutting a tight arc through the frigid sky. Below him, the B-17 formations stretched for miles. 3 vast boxes of silver bombers pushing deeper into German airspace. They looked solid, unstoppable, but Howard knew the truth. At this altitude, under this pressure, a bomber formation was as vulnerable as a glass chandelier. One well-coordinated Luftwaffe strike could shatter it. And the Germans knew it too. Howard spotted them gathering off his 9 o'clock, a cluster of black specks growing fast. FW-190s in a climbing turn, preparing for a diving attack on the high squadron. Their formation was tight, disciplined, unlike the earlier broken attempts. This was a professional strike team, likely led by an ace. The bombers saw them as well. Howard heard it on the open frequency, strained voices from gunners trying to keep calm. "Bandits forming up left side, looks like a big one. Where the hell are our escorts?" Another replied quietly, "We've only got one, and he's already engaged." Howard didn't waste time. He rolled hard left and doved the German formation. He knew they wanted him to hesitate. A lone fighter charging into a full-strength FW-190 element was supposed to break off at the last second. No sane pilot risked a head-on merge without support. Howard didn't break. He held the line. The Germans were forced to adapt. Their formation leader snapped a wing over, pulling the attack element wide. That small delay, just 1 second, gave the B-17 tail gunners enough time to open fire. Tracers raked the sky, ripping through the carefully organized German run. Howard fired a long, suppressive burst, again not to destroy, but to force the enemy to maneuver. The Luftwaffe strike fell apart. 290s peeled right. Another dove to gain distance. A fourth tried to hold the attack, but took concentrated fire from 3 bombers and broke off in a steep roll. The bombers were stunned. Howard pulled up through their defensive fire, passing so close to a B-17's belly turret that the gunner shouted on the radio, "Major, you're crazy, but keep doing whatever this is." Then came the moment that cemented everything. A voice on the bomber net, calm, almost reverent. "That Mustang, he's staying with us." Alone, Howard felt the weight of it. The expectation, the trust. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Another cluster of fighters was forming off the right flank. Bf-109s this time, 20 or more. The Germans were adjusting their tactics now, coordinating from 2 angles at once to overwhelm the solitary escort. Howard forced his breathing steady, rolled his Mustang toward them, and pushed the throttle forward until the Merlin roared. If they wanted to break the formation, they'd have to go through him first. He intended to make that cost as high as possible. The new threat approached like a tide of steel. 20 Bf-109s stretched into 2 staggered elements, angling down sun from the right. It was a classic Luftwaffe hammer blow. Blind the bombers with glare, then tear through the formation before gunners could track the attack. Howard recognized the setup instantly. He'd studied it in training films, heard veterans describe it in after-action debriefs. But now he was the only shield between that maneuver and 300 lives. He pushed the throttle forward until the Merlin engine's vibration became a physical force through the cockpit frame. Altitude advantage was everything. So he climbed, slowly at first, then hard enough that the P-51's wings trembled under the strain. The Germans saw him coming. At 24,000 feet, there was no hiding. But Howard wasn't trying to hide. He was trying to get above them. If he met their attack head-on, he could disrupt their timing. If he could disrupt their timing, the bombers had a chance. The Luftwaffe formation leader committed first. His element dove in a perfect line-abreast attack. Engines screaming, guns already flashing. But Howard reached the top of his climb just in time. He rolled inverted and dove straight at them. 2 fighters, 10 fighters, 20, all converging in one shrinking piece of sky. The bomber crews watched it happen. A single Mustang streaking into the heart of a descending swarm. Someone on one of the B-17 intercoms muttered, "Holy hell, he's actually charging them." The first 109 flashed past him, too fast for a clean shot, but Howard didn't care. He wasn't here to pick targets. He was here to break their attack. He fired anyway, long bursts, not aiming for kills but forcing the Germans to split. And they did. 1 pulled vertical. Another rolled away. 3 broke formation to avoid collision. It was working. He was turning a coordinated assault into chaos. But Howard wasn't untouched. Rounds tore past his canopy, stitching the air behind him. A burst struck near the tail, jolting the P-51 hard enough to slam his shoulder into the cockpit frame. Warning lights flickered. Nothing critical, but the Germans had marked him now. Howard gritted his teeth and pulled through a tight, climbing spiral, forcing 2 pursuing fighters to widen their turn. He kicked the rudder, rolled level, and fired a deflection burst so close that the passing fighter's pilot flinched and instinctively pulled off. The bomber crews watched the entire exchange, mesmerized and terrified. They counted at least 12 German fighters chasing him, all trying to drag him away from the formation. He refused to be dragged. Howard cut power, snapped into a high G turn, and reversed direction so violently that his vision narrowed. He pointed his nose back toward the bombers, using the Germans' momentum against them. A pilot on the B-17 Hard Luck Lady whispered on the radio, "He keeps coming back. I've never seen anything like this. And the truth was becoming clear. This wasn't normal escort work. This wasn't standard doctrine. This was one man rewriting the rules of air combat in real time. Howard leveled out just ahead of the formation, breathing hard, hands trembling from the strain of the last maneuver. His Mustang was no longer pristine. One aileron felt sluggish. The left wing showed fresh scars. But it still flew, and as long as it flew, he wasn't leaving the bombers. Below him, the three B-17 groups tightened their formation, the gunners bracing themselves for the next wave. Everyone knew the Luftwaffe wasn't done. Not even close. The Germans had altitude, numbers, and home field advantage. Howard had a single fighter and a promise. The next attack came from dead astern. 12 FW-190s in a stacked formation, gliding into perfect position for the most lethal move in daylight combat, the tail chase. Bombers feared it more than any other tactic. Their rear turrets could fire, yes, but when fighters approached from slightly above and slightly offset, their tracers slipped into blind angles where gunners could barely track them. Howard saw it unfolding and felt a cold weight settle in his chest. This was the moment bomber formations died. He rolled left and dove behind the trailing B-17 element. The 190s committed instantly, descending in a slow, deliberate curve. They expected to meet only scattered turret fire. They expected an easy run. What they got was Howard. He fired from too far. Every manual warned against it. Every instructor would have called it wasted ammunition. But he wasn't shooting to score hits. He was firing to force hesitation. And it worked. The lead German broke early, surprised by tracers streaking into his attack corridor. Two others followed him, instinctively adjusting their lines. That single hesitation rippled backward through the entire formation. A perfect attack dissolved into a staggered approach. The B-17 gunners finally had clean shots. Their .50 caliber machine guns roared in unison, hundreds of rounds filling the sky with burning metal. A trailing 190 took a direct hit to its engine, venting black smoke as it spiraled downward. Another sheared off to the right, flames licking its fuselage. Howard kept pressing, closing the gap, pushing his Mustang to the edge of its structural limits. He felt gun vibration through the control stick as he fired another long burst. His rounds didn't hit the fighter he aimed at, but they did force it to pull vertical, bleeding, precious speed. The German pilot never recovered position. The bomber formation lived a little longer. On the B-17 Iron Maiden, the ball turret gunner kept muttering into the intercom. That Mustang, he refuses to quit. He just refuses. The FW-190s regrouped and pulled away, frustrated, circling to prepare yet another run. Howard didn't rest. He turned sharply across the top of the formation again, smoke trailing from his left wingtip. He'd been fighting alone for nearly 15 minutes. His fuel was dropping. His ammunition was halfway gone. His engine temperature was climbing. He ignored every warning light, because directly ahead, another cluster of German fighters was forming, Bf-109s this time, lining up for a high front attack that could tear the lead bomber element apart. Howard pushed forward on the throttle. His Mustang surged. He wasn't done, not even close. Howard saw the new threat forming before any bomber gunner called it out. A wedge of Bf-109s, 15, maybe more, climbing into position ahead of the lead squadron. The high front attack was the Luftwaffe's most devastating tactic. Dive through the bomber box at extreme speed, fire once, then climb away before defensive guns could track them. Even a perfect formation struggled to survive it. And Howard was alone. He shoved the throttle forward until the Merlin engine howled. The Mustang surged, climbing just enough to buy a sliver of altitude advantage. It wasn't much, but altitude was life, and he'd take anything he could get. His cockpit smelled of fuel and cordite. Sweat froze against his oxygen mask. The 109s rolled inverted. They were committing to the dive. Howard didn't wait. He dove straight at them. Two forces, closing at a combined speed of nearly 900 kilometers per hour, converged in a space no larger than a farmhouse. Howard held the trigger, long bursts blazing from his 6.50 caliber guns. The Germans weren't expecting a head-on challenge. Escort fighters almost never charged this type of attack. They usually stayed with the bombers, tightening the perimeter, hoping to survive. Howard didn't hope. He acted. His tracers tore through the lead element's spacing, forcing the front pair to widen. One overshot entirely, ruining its attack angle. Another pulled up early, aborting. A third stayed committed and paid for it. As he flashed past Howard, something burst from the fighter's wing root. The 109 keeled sideways, diving out of control. Howard didn't celebrate. He didn't even look. He hauled the Mustang upward, pulling GS so hard his vision gray-edged. The remaining Germans roared past him toward the bombers, but their formation was broken. Fractured timing, staggered spacing, no synchronized fire. The B-17s unleashed hell. Across 3 formations, 30 machine gun positions erupted. A stream of .50 caliber fire tore into the diving 109s. One exploded in a spray of debris. Another clipped a wing and rolled into a cloud bank. A third limped away, trailing smoke. The attack that should have torn the lead bomber group apart instead scattered like frightened birds. Howard came out his climb behind the bombers again, heart hammering, oxygen mask fogged. Every nerve screamed for rest, but the sky was full of new threats. A voice crackled over the bomber intercom. "Whoever that Mustang is, tell him he just saved the whole damned lead box." Another added, "Is he really alone out there?" The reply was grim, quiet, undeniable. "He's all we've got." Howard checked his ammo. The counters were dropping fast. He'd burned through more than half during the last series of charges. Fuel wasn't far behind, but he still had a weapon the Germans hadn't accounted for: momentum. Psychological momentum. Every time he broke an attack, he forced the Luftwaffe to reset. Every reset bought the bombers another 30 seconds, another minute, another mile closer to Allied territory. And after 20 minutes of combat, the Germans were realizing something deeply unsettling. No matter how many times they regrouped, no matter how many angles they tried, the lone Mustang always returned. Howard scanned the sky. More fighters were forming. Another wave. He tightened his harness. The battle wasn't even close to over. Howard could feel the tempo of the battle shifting. The Luftwaffe wasn't withdrawing, they were reorganizing. Smarter, tighter, more deliberate. The pilots attacking him now were not green replacements or scattered survivors of broken passes. These were veterans, leaders, pilots accustomed to overwhelming their targets by sheer discipline. And Howard was showing them something they had never trained for: a lone escort who refused to break. The next wave formed high and wide, 15 fighters splitting into 2 prongs. One element circled to hit the low squadron from below. The other began a wide climbing arc toward Howard's altitude, forcing him to react. For the first time since the fight began, he had a choice, and neither was good. He could break down to stop the low attack, exposing himself to the climbing element, or he could climb to meet the high threat, leaving the lower bombers almost naked. Howard made the decision instantly. He went high, not because the top threat was worse, but because altitude dictated everything. If the Germans seized the high position, they could turn the battle into a downward spiral of attack after attack. The bombers would never recover. The Mustang strained as he climbed. The engine temperature crept into the danger zone. Warning lights flickered. Howard ignored them all. He rolled inverted at the peak and dove at the climbing German element. The Luftwaffe leader must have been experienced. He spotted Howard's move, adjusted by pulling his formation slightly wider, and caught him in a deadly cross angle. 2 109s broke left. 2 broke right. The leader stayed centered. A perfect 3-prong trap. Howard flew straight into it. Tracer rounds sliced past his canopy, ripping into the thin air behind him. His Mustang jolted as a burst clipped the left wingtip. Smoke curled from the paneling. Another volley struck beneath the fuselage. Alarms screamed through the cockpit, but Howard didn't break. Instead, he rolled sharply right into the very guns of the fighter trying to bracket him. It was a suicidal-looking move, except for one thing. The German didn't expect it. Howard's abrupt change in direction forced the 109 to overshoot. Howard pulled the trigger. His burst stitched across the fighter's belly, shredding its oil cooler. The aircraft pitched down, trailing a thick plume. The remaining two 109s hesitated just long enough for Howard to escape their triangle of fire. He climbed again, bleeding speed, but regaining position above the bombers. Below him, disaster was forming. The second prong, the low attack element, had begun their run on the trailing bomber squadron. Their approach vector was nearly flawless, angled upward through the least defended arc of the formation. Howard Duff, this time he didn't think, didn't calculate. He simply reacted. The Mustang screamed downward at terrifying speed, engine howling, airframe shuddering. If he misjudged, even slightly, he'd plow into the bomber box. But he didn't hesitate. He fired long bursts as he fell, spraying the Luftwaffe's path with tracers. The German pilots broke off mid-climb, startled by the sudden hail of gunfire. One pulled left, another snapped downward. Two collided so closely that their wingtips nearly touched. The trailing B-17 squadron lived. Howard leveled out beneath them, heart pounding, vision blurring from G-forces. His oxygen flow stuttered. His ammunition counters dropped again. He'd been fighting for more than 25 minutes, alone. The bombers were still intact. But Howard's Mustang was starting to come apart. Howard could feel the tempo of the battle shifting. The Luftwaffe wasn't withdrawing, they were reorganizing. Smarter, tighter, more deliberate. The pilots attacking him now were not green replacements or scattered survivors of broken passes. These were veterans, leaders, pilots accustomed to overwhelming their targets by sheer discipline. And Howard was showing them something they had never trained for, a lone escort who refused to break. The next wave formed high and wide, 15 fighters splitting into two prongs. One element circled to hit the low squadron from below. The other began a wide climbing arc toward Howard's altitude, forcing him to react. For the first time since the fight began, he had a choice, and neither was good. He could break down to stop the low attack, exposing himself to the climbing element, or he could climb to meet the high threat, leaving the lower bombers almost defenseless. Howard made the decision instantly. He went high, not because the top threat was worse, but because altitude dictated everything. If the Germans seized the high position, they could turn the battle into a downward spiral of attack after attack. The bombers would never recover. The Mustang strained as he climbed. Engine temperature crept into the danger zone. Warning lights flickered. Howard ignored them all. He rolled inverted at the peak and dove straight at the climbing German element. The Luftwaffe leader spotted him, adjusting slightly. But Howard's sudden, aggressive maneuver forced the enemy into a split-second error. One fighter overshot. Another pulled up. The leader remained. But Howard fired a long burst, crippling the 109's oil cooler. It spiraled out of control. The remaining enemies hesitated, giving the B-17 gunners precious seconds to fire. The trailing bombers survived yet another pass. Howard leveled out above the formation, breathing hard. He had been fighting alone for more than 25 minutes. The sky still threatened, but the bombers were alive. The Luftwaffe launched their final assault. 20 fighters swooped in, diving at the bomber box from multiple angles. Howard knew this could be the decisive run. If he failed, the lead bombers would be shredded. He pushed the throttle forward, diving through clouds of tracer rounds. Each maneuver tested his Mustang's limits. One engine hit, one wing nicked by flak, but Howard ignored the pain, the fatigue, and the fear. The bomber crews trusted him. Every second he survived gave them a fighting chance. Howard targeted the lead element. His bursts were precise, aimed not only to hit but to disrupt. Fighters broke formation, collided, or veered off, unable to coordinate their attack under his relentless pressure. From below, a bombardier radioed. "Who is that Mustang? He's alone, and he's stopping them all." Howard's name wasn't known to them yet. It didn't matter. All that mattered was survival. Another German fighter, aggressive and inexperienced, made a direct pass at a B-17. Howard rolled, fired, and forced the enemy to overshoot. The bomber lived. Another burst, another enemy down. Time slowed, then compressed. Each attack brought adrenaline, calculation, and instinct into a singular focus. Howard's Mustang was battered, his ammo low, fuel dwindling. Still, he kept the attackers off the formation, one wave after another. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last German broke away, retreating. The bomber formations were intact. Howard climbed alongside them, alone, exhausted, and still flying. His squadron had scattered early, but he had held the sky himself. 300 men owed their lives to one Mustang, one pilot, one impossible mission. When the B-17s finally returned to friendly airspace, their crews were in shock. Observers immediately filed reports praising an unknown Mustang pilot who had fought single-handedly for nearly 30 minutes against overwhelming odds. His bravery was almost unbelievable. Word reached Fighter Command quickly. Howard's actions were examined, debriefed, and eventually celebrated. But beyond medals or recognition, the mission had lasting effects on air combat doctrine. Fighter groups began emphasizing commitment, flexibility, and aggressive engagement, learning from the instinct and determination of a single pilot. Howard became the only fighter pilot awarded the Medal of Honor in the European theater. His name entered the annals of aviation history, not for kills alone, but for courage under impossible circumstances, for protecting hundreds of lives through split-second decisions, and for rewriting what it meant to defend bombers. The sky above Oschersleben would never forget that Mustang. And the lessons of Major James Howard's one-man Air Force mission would echo through decades of air combat training, proving that one determined individual can change the outcome of a battle. The story of Major James Howard's mission spread quickly through the 8th Air Force. Pilots studied it in briefings, debriefings, and training films. They dissected every maneuver, every decision he made while alone against overwhelming odds. What stood out wasn't just his marksmanship or flying skill. It was his ability to remain calm under pressure, to read the enemy, and to anticipate the dynamics of the air battle in real time. Howard demonstrated that doctrine could be broken intelligently. Standard protocol dictated disengagement when faced with impossible odds. But he proved that a single pilot, understanding energy management, positioning, and timing, could protect an entire bomber formation. His one-man Air Force concept became a case study. Squadrons began integrating more aggressive escort tactics. Pilots were taught to use altitude, speed, and psychological pressure to disrupt enemy formations, not merely to stay close to the bombers. Howard's engagement showed that initiative, creativity, and courage could multiply the effect of one aircraft across an entire formation. Veteran pilots who had initially dismissed Howard's chances reconsidered their assumptions. Younger pilots, inspired by his audacity, approached missions differently. The 8th Air Force incorporated simulations based on his maneuvers, emphasizing split-second decision-making over rigid adherence to outdated rules. Howard himself never sought fame. He remained grounded in humility, insisting that the bomber crews deserved every bit of credit. Still, the Air Force recognized the broader impact. His Medal of Honor citation highlighted not only his bravery, but also his influence on bomber escort doctrine. By the end of the war, the principles Howard demonstrated saved countless lives. Pilots and bomber crews alike remembered that January day over Oschersleben, not as a statistic, but as a lesson in courage, ingenuity, and commitment to others. Major James Howard returned home after the war as a hero, but his story continued to inspire generations of aviators. Military academies, flight schools, and tactical programs studied the Oschersleben mission for its lessons on leadership, initiative, and the psychology of air combat. The one-man Air Force principle became more than legend. It became doctrine and practice. Modern fighter training emphasizes decisiveness, creative engagement, and the responsibility of an individual to influence the outcome of a battle. Howard's courage demonstrated that protocol is not a substitute for judgment, and that sometimes one pilot, acting decisively, can turn the tide of history. Bomber crews who survived owe their lives to him. Air combat historians recognize that the tactics developed from his mission influenced escort strategies through the remainder of World War II and into the Cold War era. Howard's Mustang became symbolic of the impact one person can have, reminding generations that bravery and quick thinking are as powerful as superior numbers or firepower. Even today, the Medal of Honor citation, training films, and declassified combat reports preserve the memory of that January 11th, 1944 mission. Major Howard's daring stand over Oschersleben is not just a story of heroism. It is a blueprint for extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. The sky over Germany that day, filled with B-17s, enemy fighters, and one unyielding Mustang, remains etched in history as proof that determination, skill, and leadership can defy the odds. Howard's legacy is eternal. One man, one mission, hundreds of lives saved, and a doctrine forever changed.